excited to invite my panel up to stage. Not my panel, it's their panel, but I get to introduce them all. And it's a table full of friends that I get to invite up here. And I'm so excited. So Randstad Sourceright put together a panel, and Paul is their leader, and he is just 30 years of experience. I have like 3 pages of bio, and I thought about reading it for you, but you need to just get to know him yourself and learn what a wonderful leader he is and about all of his experiences. And he is going to bring up today Daryl Hammett, General Manager, Global Demand and Operations at Amazon Web Services, Rudy Lim, Chief Procurement Officer at the Gates Foundation, Lindsay Bergemann, Senior Director of Procurement and Sourcing at NWEA, and Jesus Celaya, Senior Manager of Category Management and Strategic Sourcing at RAI. So talk about a rock star panel. This is going to be so good. So come on up, guys.
Trying to send a message, you left the bunk cake up here.
Well, thank you very much for the introduction, Dawn, and hello, everybody. What I'm going to do, so I won't spend any time at all to introduce myself, other than to say that Randstad Sourceright, we offer a range of service procurement solutions. If you want to talk to us, talk to us. Mark Twain famously was corresponding with somebody, and he said to them, "I'm sorry, I don't have time to write you a short letter, so I'll write you a long one instead." And that should resonate with everybody, because how much time do we not have and not devote to making things simple, but we spend more time trying to justify and explain things that are way more complicated in our organizations. So what we're going to try and do with fantastic panelists here today is try and talk through how we write a shorter procurement letter. Now, we're going to cover a number of different topics and areas. I'm going to ask you for some perspectives as well. And then I'm going to round out with a personal story of how my mother, about 10 years ago, taught me the best thing ever around simple procurement, but I'll get to that in a much later time. So, just to level set the audience, first of all, put your hand up if you think that in your organization today, all of your policies and procedures and approaches are as simple as they could be. No. Now, you could have gone down to a betting shop and made money on that answer, couldn't you? But let's start by examining what does simple procurement really mean. So, Lindsay,
sure.
Start with you. What do you think simple procurement means?
Absolutely. So I can't say that I've actually purposely chosen simple procurement. I've been more forced to. But I would say that having policies that are easy to understand, and there's not too many of them. I'm trying really hard not to say simple, because that would be meaningless to you all. Let's see what else. I would also say that when you're hiring for the future, making sure that it's those soft skills, and as we've learned in the last couple of years, those that can be resilient and help lead that change in your organization that you're looking for.
Okay. Jesus, what about yourself?
Yeah, so simple procurement to me means like really simplifying the procurement experience for our customers. So I think we've expected our customers to navigate these very complex procurement processes and systems to procure goods and services. And so when I think of simple procurement, I think of doing away with that expectation, right? And one thing that we've been doing at REI is we've been trying to simplify the experience through category management. So we have assigned category managers to support our different functional business categories. And so our customers now, or business stakeholders, simply reach out to their assigned category manager whenever they have a procurement need. That category manager pulls in the appropriate procurement resource and expertise, and then project manages the whole process for them end to end. And so no more complex intake form processes or navigating systems to raise purchase requisitions and things like that.
So it's all about the engagement experience. That's really just making that streamlined. Daryl.
Yes, I think simplification is really relative. And I think that we have to, when we look at simplification, we have to look at what we're looking for and what we're trying to drive. And what are the goals and the objectives, and it has to be clarity. I think simplification starts with clarity and where are we trying to go, and does everybody along the way understand the outcome, goals, and objectives, and the processes and mechanisms that are in place to deliver on those goals and objectives. To me, that is simplifying the process and making it simple, but again, within it, it is all relative based on your business, your enterprise, your organization, your supply chain, the structure of your organization, and your organization's values. But again, if it is simple where people can understand, and everyone that is involved in the supply chain process understands the goals, the objectives, and outcomes, and the mechanisms and processes that support them, that is, to me, simplification.
Thanks. And last but not least, Rudy?
I agree with all the panelists with what they have mentioned. So what I would like just to add is if you look at from a buying experience, not to pick on Amazon, but I would love to have all the buying experience like an Amazon like checkout process, right?
Sure.
That's what everybody gravitates towards. And when you think about the policy and think about, do they even need to know about the policy? If you properly incorporated the policy into your P2P platform or your source-to-pay processes, then technically they already following the policy. And last but not least is simplifying the processes around how do they engage you. The higher the engagement, the outcome is better. So try to find avenues where having a meaningful engagement should be transparent, fast, and they should know who they are working with at any given time. That would be simplification for me.
Okay. And we've got some great perspectives. Thank you all for that. Anybody else in the audience got any particular thoughts on what does simple procurement mean to you? Anything that may be additional to what we've talked about? You really do run, don't you?
Good run.
So I'm Purvi Kondal with Sephora, and I will say, to me, simplification is something that consistent that everyone can follow without having to follow, right?
Excellent, yeah. Very good one. Anybody else? Even though you don't do it simple today? Okay, let's go on to the next area. So, of course, if we've identified what does simple procurement look like, there's lots of things that get in the way of that. So, what do you think are the key things that get in the way of being able to make that change? So, Darryl, if I can ask you to start first.
One of the things I think that when we think about inventing and building, we think a lot about how big we can make it, how complex we can, but we don't attach simplification or invent and simplify. And one of the things that I value at AWS and Amazon is we have a leadership principle called invent and simplify. So you can build something, but how do you also either stop doing something else? And as you're inventing, how better from a process or mechanism is that going to be than what was before? And so I think that when we think about, I'm going to plug SIG University here because I love it. Certified in all of their curriculum, by the way, all of their courses. The second one in the United States to ever be able to. But anyway, just leave all that alone. But anyway, only 2 of those, and it was I was the second one. But anyway.
Your nose is a little.
Sorry, yeah. But when you think about innovation, and one of the things that SIG University focuses on, when you create these centers of excellence, what we have to be honest about is when we think about building new processes and mechanisms and try to invent and simplify, the challenge is really within the people who do those job duties and responsibilities, because the first thing people think about is how that is going to impact me. And so I think that when we think about inventing and simplifying to drive innovation or automation or any of those things, we have to think about the people that are actually building and being a part of that process, or that COE or Center of Excellence, a cross-functional team, have to remember their beliefs can get in the way. And sometimes their perception is, I need to add more complexity to protect my job function, my department. Sometimes people don't work to either eliminate their jobs or reduce their jobs or try to transfer responsibility. So you end up with bigger projects and much more complexity because we don't interrogate our beliefs as we think of these COEs working cross-functionally.
So it's like people are conditioned to have to approach it in a certain way. Thank you. Rudy.
I'd like to touch on the leadership aspect, and perhaps maybe we talked about metrics and KPIs and how that can stifle simplicity, and how I think we all believe and want to strive for simplification in our processes. So for example, when chief legal officer is looking for compliance and financial officer is looking for financial stewardship, and these are obviously their main core priorities, and when you get a mix of folks that are looking at the processes end to end and trying to measure different outcome, it's not a rocket science that you ended up having different opinions of what good looks like, what the North Star should be. So if you think about all of that, which is very complicated depending on what industry you are, the maturity of the company, it probably will be very hard to come with a common denominator of what the North Star should be. What I found was, being involved in 8 different companies and nonprofit and other for-profit companies, I find that the common denominator is often around user experience, the business partner engagement level, and how satisfied are they with the process. Ultimately, I think there's so many great topics, sessions today and yesterday, all about how do we measure and how do we get the engagement surveys out there. At some point, some folks were saying that at every engagement, every transaction, there should be a survey link and how they felt the entire process was. So I think if we were to gravitate towards a metric, which I would recommend that consider the survey of the engagement level and how satisfied the business partner is with the entire process, it gives you a sense of, I think all leaders can agree and gravitate that is a good metric without biases of what their role is within the company.
Yeah. I think that's the key thing, that there is so much misalignment often between what the business thinks is important and what procurement thinks is important. Yeah. And so you've got a barrier there before you start. Lindsay, what about you?
I would have to say that I think it's super important, going back to hiring for our teams, right? And aligning with HR and those competencies that you're hiring for. Of course, we would love to see a rock star procurement tenured hire, but I think that also we're in this economy and such, we need to start looking at more of those soft skills and be asking different questions about maybe how they've transformed something in their company. It doesn't need to necessarily be related to procurement. And also soft skills, right? So making sure that they're self-aware and that they can learn and grow. And I think that a lot of times we focus too much on their actual competency instead of, are they a change agent? Can they actually bring projects to the finish line? And show examples of that, because I can teach procurement all day long, although I need to go to university, of course, before I can do it officially. But I can't train somebody with some of those, with common sense sometimes, right? So common sense isn't always commonplace. So
yeah, no, exactly. And I haven't checked the syllabus on the university, but I'm sure that whole kind of enablement piece is really embedded into, because procurement is often seen as a very technical function. And I think actually people buy things every day. And so it's very hard when they do that to suddenly have someone come in and say, hey, I'm going to show you how to do that. Jesus, what about you?
Yeah, so I think that the business stakeholders, I think perception of procurement can impact, can get in the way of change, right? So if business stakeholders perceive procurement as a bureaucratic compliance organization that's going to bog down their process and policy and procedure, when procurement is looking to then drive some transformation, perhaps you want to become a more strategic organization, you want to increase your span of control, move further upstream, want a seat at the table, that perception from business stakeholder can drive some resistance, right? Because they're not seeing like what's in it for them, right? And so I think as a procurement organization, you have to really strive to change that perception that of that business stakeholders have, and you just have to do that over time, right? By working with them and showing that you can be flexible and that you can drive value based on what matters most to them.
Yeah, and confirmation bias as well. I mean, years ago when I was consulting, I used to run some training for internal stakeholders, and I used to, at the beginning, say to them, think of an image in your mind when I say to you, you now need to go engage with procurement. And I give them 30 seconds to think of the image, and then I put up on screen a nice fluffy teddy bear. I say, well, you're going to see that, right? Nobody said that. Next picture was some kind of picture of a barrier, or the police force, something like that. And everybody said that was a similar image they had. That it's something you have to overcome, you have to work around, as opposed to someone that's actually going to actually help funnel you and enable you. So I think that is a really big issue. So we've talked about, Darryl talked about conditioning. Rudy talked about leadership, alignment. Lindsay, you talked about capability. As you talked about the actual expectation of business users. I'm really quite interested amongst the room, which one of those things do you think actually is the hardest to actually overcome? So just show of hands, who think it's hardest to overcome conditioning? What about leadership and alignment?
I would say that too.
What about capability of people to actually make that change? Got some university candidates there. The last one about the confirmation bias of the organization. You're confronted with that impression that doesn't matter what happens, it's going to be hard.
More hands. Wow.
Yeah, I think the last one has it. Okay. So, in sort of obviously the next step on this is what do we think we can do practically to then move the function forward? So I'm going to sort of ask you to just maybe provide the flip side to that perspective that you shared earlier. So, Rudy, you talked about leadership and alignment. So how can we overcome some of those things?
I'm glad you did the last survey because it clearly shows that the perception is key. So the way, when I view, looking at processes and how to simplify it as a leader and how to influence other leaders is think about how you want to project procurement in your future state, right? So you're trying to create a brand. You're trying to create assuming that your current brand is not what you desire. You're trying to create a new brand. So you think about how are you going to manage this product that you're, in terms of services, how are you planning to deliver that across the organization? So start planting that leadership, influencing how you want to position your organization. Is it going to think about what are the things that you want to project quickly? For example, policy. I'm thinking about how do you approach change management? What is your mission and vision? If your mission and vision statement is 1 page long, maybe it's too long. Maybe it's not simple. You're trying to communicate, you're trying to be simple, but then your vision and vision is not simple. And if you are saying, yeah, I'm trying to do something simple, but you're saying, I'm not changing my 40-page policy, what are you trying to say? So what your initiatives what you're focusing on and how you're communicating to the leaders would then determine, in my mind, what the brand will become or continue to stay if you don't make that change.
And would you sort of highlight one or two particular examples of things you've seen in the past that made a real difference in that respect?
I'll give an example. So I joined the Gates Foundation. They have no sourcing team and practice. I'm the first FTE to run their indirect department. And try to explain that to 1,800 people that have not done procurement or learn. I have to explain what strategic sourcing is to begin with. And I said, hell with that. I'm not going to explain that because that is being too technical. So what I did was I showed them the picture of the TSA pre-check. And I said, this is the picture. See, the future state is the pre-check lane. The current state is the regular lane. Get it? Say, yes, get it. Done. So just the simplicity of that picture speaks 1,000 words, and I don't have to explain anything about preferred vendors, master contracts, all of the things that are sausage-making technical terms. I just forget about it and just focus on one picture. And everybody got it. Everybody.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's really good. And you said yesterday we were talking amongst ourselves about don't tell them how to make the sausage.
Yeah, I keep saying that, don't I?
Sorry, I'm busted your thunder for later. Lindsay, I mean, you talked earlier about the capability, the challenge. So what do we need to do different, apart from SIG University, but what do we need to do differently to upskill?
Sure. So I kind of alluded to this before, but I think really aligning with your HR team and your recruiters on really specifically what you're looking for. I recently joined NWEA from a school district, and it was like pulling teeth trying to get anyone to apply. So hence why I had to do a lot of the training myself. But NWEA offers most of their roles as remote, and so we started seeing a just a high volume of applicants. So super grateful for it. But if I'm just looking at the technical terms, it's hard to differentiate between people, and without having to call or video conference or meet in person, really just digging into them providing examples on how they have either led transformation in the department that they've been in, how they have been that change agent that you're talking about, and then you have to live that yourself, right? As that procurement leader, you're going to be the #1 influencer for your department, and then hire that next influencer that can then go out and take another part of your company with it. So, and just keep gaining on those relationships.
Daryl, you talked about conditioning.
Yeah. Yeah, I think one of the things that, again, one of those things I'm very proud of being a part of AWS and Amazon is that we have part of one of the things that we do is we implement a working backwards strategy. And I think working backwards, starting with the end in mind all the time, what are we trying to accomplish? I think that is extremely important in an environment that we're in today. And I like to coin this expression. We think that it's B2B, but it's really B to C to B. Because a lot of us are influenced by organizations like Amazon when we buy online. And we purchase online, or a lot of us have been engaged in decentralized procurement, which is the way a lot of organizations are going today, versus centralizing or decentralizing and letting departments or functions drive their own procurement. And so when you're dealing with all these competing B to C to B, because this customer has had an experience that they then want to come to work and they want to feel like when they engage procurement, I can have the same experience that I had with the carts in the marketplace that I just had at Amazon or AWS. Those things create sometimes the wrong types of expectations, and so you have to reset expectations by starting with the end in mind and working backwards and starting with the lowest hanging fruit. Here's what we're trying to create, here's where we're striving for, and I get this when we think about change and driving change with our teams through conditioning, is sometimes the starting backwards gives them an opportunity to have quicker wins when you start with the most simple things that we can change and how we can apply. And I'll give you an example. ESG, we were talking about ESG in the CPO roundtable the other day, and some people are struggling with E, environmental, and some people are struggling with G, or governance. Well, one of the things that we can over-index on is S, which is the social, or supplier diversity, or supplier inclusion. We can actually over-index on that. So starting with the end in mind, we would love to have ESG in the long term, but if we could start today and start applying some simple policies to engage diverse or minority suppliers and kind of start there. Let's start with the end in mind and then start working on the lowest hanging fruit around not only that, but other tenets and other strategies within procurement to create quick wins. Because once you get momentum going, the conditioning will start. We can win. We can do this. We can feel good about it. We can take pride in it because it's not feeling like you're drinking, taking a straw and drinking from the ocean, because that is sometimes the overwhelming impact you have, and it actually promotes that conditioning of, I got to make this too complex. This is going to take too long. This is going to be a 3-year project, and it doesn't necessarily have to be so.
Okay, thanks, Al. And Jesus, in terms of how do you really flip the switch with internal stakeholders?
Yeah. So I mean, I think again, you have to work with your customer to kind of change the perception of procurement. And I mean, but then you have to walk the walk, right? So if a customer, for them, speed to market is what's important, or there are other things that are important to customers, that's not just like cost savings, or it's not just like policy and procedure. You have to, you have to reorient your organization and your function around what's important to your customers. Dan, I think with Sprinkler, gave a really good talk earlier today about building customer-centric procurement organizations. Procurement ultimately is a service function, right? So we exist for the sake of our stakeholders, and so we have to start having these conversations with stakeholders around what's important to them. At REI recently, we set off on this transformation journey to transform procurement to make it simpler. And the first thing we did is we had focus groups with a pretty big cross-section of our stakeholders across the co-op to understand, okay, what's your perception of procurement? What's your experience when you work with procurement today? What would you like that to look like in the future? What's important to you? Where do we bring value? Where can we bring value? And so we use all of that research and insight, and we use it to inform our transformation. Post-transformation, we are in the process of putting a stakeholder advisory council in place, where we have our stakeholders sit on the council and steer the direction that the procurement organization and function is taking at the co-op, right? So they get an opportunity to provide input and, again, highlight what's important to them. And so it just figure out what your stakeholders care about, what they value, and then figure out how you can make that happen.
Mm-hmm. And we've talked a lot about sort of the internal agenda. Suppliers obviously get hugely impacted by complexity as well.
Right.
Any of you like to share a particular perspective on the importance of reducing a supplier cost of sale?
Daryl.
All right, the voice of the supplier, right? So yes, I think it's important, and I shared this a little bit ago. I think one of the things that we do not do as much as we could is really interrogate the process of supplier relationship management. Mm-hmm. And I think that one of the things that if we took a little bit better approach of how we're mitigating risk, how we're managing governance, how are we managing and running RFPs, I think there could be a reduction or an opportunity to reduce complexity when it comes to managing and governing and supplier relationship or vendor management. And especially as we look at over the next 12 months, 40% of small businesses, the minority-owned businesses last year have closed. And they were shuttered because of capital or not having enough capital. And I think one of the things, if we think about the future state, how are we, because it's going to impact all of us. We're going to have suppliers over the next few months with the recession, with the interest rates, not having enough capital, not having enough funding. I think there are ways that we can simplify the process of dealing and governing, making sure that the suppliers get paid faster, finding ways to incent them on having good programs like ESG programs. How are you looking at their tier 1, their tier 2, their tier 3 suppliers, and having visibility and reducing your costs and mitigating your risk as well? I think there are a lot of opportunities that we have that are very low-hanging fruit that doesn't take a lot of effort, but does take awareness, and simplifying those things to me, as again, simplification being relative based on your size of organization and your priorities and objectives. But these are low-hanging fruit. How do we manage our vendors? What is our risk? What is our visibility to our diverse or minority suppliers? Where are our potential risks with suppliers that don't have enough capital? All of those things to me are really ripe opportunities that we can actually drive lower cost of sales and actually improve, actually help to improve our risk.
I mean, in preparing for this panel, sorry, Rudy.
Can I add to that? So from what we did recently that may indirectly impact the onboarding process for any new vendors is around the idea of identifying and assessing your risk upfront in the intake process. That's one thing that I was able to, at this point, achieve, influencing the various governance, due diligence stakeholders, the InfoSec, the legals, and whatnot, and have them all agree to talk about risk in a similar fashion. So if Rudy was to say that this vendor went through the intake process and I'll bite 10, 15 questions, whatever that may be, a weighted average of weightings of the questions based on their responses, and if Rudy said the analyzer came out as low risk, when that is true, then it goes true all the way downstream. So previously, we didn't have that common language. So that's one thing that could impact because you're talking about smaller, medium-sized business. And if you don't understand the risk and every vendor review process goes through the same, like an enterprise vetting process, then this vendor will not be sustainable. The whole onboarding process is just simply too cumbersome. So we're trying to figure out what is high risk, low risk. Well, we're not that sophisticated. We're just trying to figure out what is low risk and not low risk. That's how simple we're trying to get to. And if we can all agree that based on the questions, this is low risk, then it should impact the downstream sourcing, contracting, P2P, governance structure.
Yeah. So let's test the bravery in the room, shall we? Hands up if you're a service provider, stroke supplier. Okay, who would like to volunteer an example of what you think is an overly complex, burdensome
Yes,
example?
please.
Yeah.
Too many.
It's going to get interesting.
I'm Jacob Sohn with Graphite Connect, and I joined Graphite Connect because I've been a software salesman for like 12 years, and I've been onboarded as a supplier by companies, the biggest companies in the world, like, for 10 years now. And a complex, uncomfortable, or burdensome process is when I receive a spreadsheet questionnaire from InfoSec, and I receive a PDF from the accounting team, and then I receive a second spreadsheet questionnaire from the privacy team, and then some other person who doesn't know what's going on with the other side of the house also sends me the same spreadsheet that I've already filled out and says, I need to fill it out or I'm not gonna get paid. And so that's really common. That's actually why I joined Graphite, not to make a pitch for Graphite, but Graphite brings all of that in and was designed to centralize all of that process in one central, really easy to use location with full transparency of the workflow throughout. So anyway, don't use spreadsheets anymore for your onboarding questions.
And I think, Dawn, if I had another half an hour, I could turn this into a therapy session. But, anybody else want to offer something?
So what I was going to say is there's very many parts of the RFP process itself that I think are ripe for improvement, and the one that I sort of hone in on is the requirement for bidders to provide like a signed acknowledgement when you submit your bid. So you have to have an officer of the company, sign this form that says basically, this is an authorized proposal. And I mean, in the environment we're in today, like getting wet signatures is like a thing of the past. I don't even really know what that is intended to do, other than, I guess, give somebody some assurance it's a legit proposal. But I mean, that's just an example of sort of the administrative parts of the RFP process that as a provider, it's just sort of bemusing.
Yeah. We can continue this dialogue after. I want to test the bravery of the buyers in the room now. Hands up if you're a buyer. Now, keep your hand up if when you create an RFP, you actually consider the cost of completing it and responding to it before you send it out. Right, suppliers, they're the ones you want to work with. Okay, well listen, it's been great to have this dialogue. You know, this is the sort of topic that can really evolve. I just thought I'd share a personal story that really made me realize what simple procurement really means. So my mother, who I love to death, has got 3 really irritating characteristics. I've been working for more than 35 years. She's never, ever, ever been able to describe what I do to anybody. Second thing is she's Olympic quality procrastinator. And the third thing is she's very risk averse. And many, many years ago, when I was consulting in procurement, she came to me one day and said, I want to get my bathroom redecorated. And I said, great, what do you want to do? 18 months went by where she was thinking through, and it ended up becoming you lose the will to live. And then I was around there one weekend, and she said, I've got a plumber starting on Monday. I said, what? To do what? To do my bathroom. Wow, how did that happen? And she walked me through a procurement process. I decided what I wanted. I wrote it down. I asked my friends to recommend somebody. I looked online. I invited them in. I got some pricing, decided who I wanted, and they started on Monday. I thought, this is it. This is my moment, right? She is now going to understand what I do for a living. And I said, Mom, that's amazing. You know, that's what I do. I help people do that kind of thing. And she looked at me the way mums do, and she said, don't be stupid, Paul. No one's going to pay you for this. Now, because she's risk averse, if I said to her, for $50, I know of an insurance policy you can take out, if anything goes wrong ever, you can have a plumber around in 10 minutes to fix it, she would have thought I was amazing. So I'd like to leave you with this thought. When it comes to simple procurement, insight trumps process every single time. Thank you much for our panel. Thank you very much for listening.